Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Cloud Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And before I get into the main point of this video, I want to make it clear very early on that I am approaching this with the best of intentions. I want to make this very clear because I do want to make it very clear. I like Connor Tomlinson. I like the Lotus Eaters. I have been critical of them in the past, of course, and I do want to genuinely come across as someone who is saying, please just, I know this is very Reddit, but please just do better. Because Carl is a rather large reason I started this channel in the first place. He is certainly an inspiration for this channel, and I wouldn't want to denigrate work he does, because I think there are many uses to it. However, I am also a member of Reform and a Reform activist. I'm fully backing Reform because I see them as the best route out of the mess we're in. But one thing I want to make clear is that we are in such a mess that we are never going to get our perfection. I don't think I'm going to see a perfect Britain in my lifetime. That is kind of my perspective on all this. The whole point of my political activism at the moment is just to get us on the starting steps. I don't expect us to even get 20% of the way to my perfect Britain by the time I die. And so when it comes to expecting perfection from anyone, I just don't expect that. And unfortunately, I think that's what, not just the Lotus Eaters, not just Connor Tomlinson, what an awful lot of the online right are effectively doing at the moment. And it's blinding them to their analysis that is usually very good. And unfortunately as well, the Lotus Eaters also do, it is a bit personal with Reform. I understand why they would be more critical, but I would ask them to, in a few cases, to try and understand the full context of what they are replying to, rather than effectively going along with what an awful lot of the online right on Twitter say about Reform. Because frankly, I'm just fed up of the lies. And Connor Tomlinson is going to get the brunt of this criticism, frankly, because I think it's respectable what he's done here. He's put his head above the parapet, and he has made an article and a post, effectively collating all of these issues together. So, just to make it clear, this is more a criticism of the online right in general, especially the more, not necessarily anti-reform lot, but the types that are very, very critical of them. And I think an awful lot is unfair. So this is less a problem I have with Connor Tomlinson personally, and more a critique of the entire online right in general. It's all focused on Connor Tomlinson, because as I say, he's done the respectable thing, and effectively collated a lot of the main issues together, which I think are generally quite unfair. And hell, Connor, if you end up watching this, get in the DMs if you want to. I could even get you on a friendly stream of Laughing at the Guardian if you want to. Some of your fellow Lotus Eaters have been on that show before, as has Carl Benjamin actually, and they all have a good time. Like, we are on the same side here, absolutely. I just think we need to understand the position we're in a bit better. And as I say, I can understand why it's personal because of your friends over at the Lotus Eaters having a bad time with Reform. But I think at this point, I think it's best I get into my critique. So, Connor made a post to Twitter 2 days ago now, actually, where he says, "We need to talk about Reform. I was vocal about voting for them in the last election. I praise their contract with the people. I've spoken to their MPs, staff and members, many of whom are good people, but I cannot support them while they continue to soften on immigration and Islam." And he goes into more detail on it, but it is a meme going around the online right that I think has absolutely no basis in reality. Reform have not softened on immigration. They have been consistent, as far as I can tell, from when they started, even back to, when Farage was in UKIP. He has always been consistent on what his policy ideas are for immigration, which is effectively, bring it right down. The exact numbers change from year to year, obviously, but it has always been, we need to massively cut immigration. It's unsustainable at the moment. And then, obviously, Islam. There's more details to get into there, but just to give a quick overview here, the online right seems to think that Reform's position was just eradicate Islam from the UK. That's never been their position, and I don't know why they thought it was, but again, we'll get into details about this. I remain a critical friend of the party who wants any insurgent political movement with half a chance of fixing Britain to succeed. And I'll take him at his word here, we'll go along with that for now. But in its present state, it has its priorities wrong. And I think at this point we should get into the article itself, because all the details there and I'd end up repeating myself. So let's get into it. Is this what winning looks like? Reform UK supporters are growing wary of infighting and weak rhetoric. Already, well, one, yes, this is what winning looks like. We are joint first in Wales and are doing quite well in council by-elections. That, by the way, is the result of rushing through with barely any money selection processes and getting any name on the ballot they can. Again, it's a bit like during the general election where they had to, because of the early call for the election, rush to get all of these candidates on ballot papers. I'm not going to lie, yeah, from the position that we have been in, this is absolutely what winning looks like. And again, when Connor says Reform UK supporters are growing wary of infighting and weak rhetoric, it's a very, very niche set of Reform UK supporters. It's effectively people on the online right who voted Reform UK last time. And I'm just going to have to say this and get it out of the way. Unfortunately, yes, that is an expendable niche. And I kind of hate to say it because I'm obviously in that orbit. But unfortunately, yeah, a lot of you are not particularly useful when it comes to winning elections. I really do kind of hate to say it because I do like a lot of you, and I do think you do good work, but you are going to be the expendable type. As I say, what is my evidence for this? Well, we're joint first in Wales, we keep winning by-elections, we're typically less than 10 points behind Tories and Labour. It is literally the best that any right-wing alternative party has ever done. In the 20th century, in the 21st century, hell, even in the 19th century. The momentum is still there, despite this niche effectively having discontent for reform at the moment. I mean, if that's happening and they keep growing, they're going to get signals that it's actually the right thing to do, I'm afraid. And there's not an awful lot you can do about that, I'm afraid to say. But as I say, Connor, this is not a personal attack on you. This is a general meme of the online right at the moment. This is a criticism of everyone. But I am going to be talking to you personally because you did write this article. But as I say, you did a good thing by writing this article because I think it's a good collision, as I say, of all the issues and all the talking points I've been seeing of reform. But I think it's time someone actually addresses this properly, and this is going to be the video for that. So, after Reform won 5 seats at the last election, over 4 million votes, let's be fair here, those of us disillusioned with the cross-party consensus of economic stagnation, mass immigration, multiculturalism and censorship were excited about the prospect of a political revolution, and I am definitely in that camp. But since promises to professionalise seem to be synonymous with softening on policy positions, please go into detail of what you mean there, and an exile of popular figures whom SW1 disapprove, I'm assuming that's going to be Ben Habib, despite rising membership numbers and a handful of council election victories, enthusiasm for reform drops any time its leader gives an interview. Yeah, and this is going to be something I go into. That's effectively because, for some reason, the online right are addicted to being the least charitable they can be when it comes to Farage, and I find it really odd. But again, I do kind of like the whole sentence structure here of, okay, the numbers are rising and they keep winning elections, but, you know, enthusiasm's dropping. In these meetings with people I talk to about reform, I see the opposite. I see the complete opposite. Hell, I said it on stream the other day. Even my barber, who has been a lifelong Labour voter, was talking about how he's been quite impressed with reform. My mum and dad, who both voted Tory again last election, they've been nothing but disappointed with the Tories in Westminster. I talked a bit about Dominic Cummings and reform and how effectively policies that they were talking about and how to deal with the migrant crisis were basically reform policy. And now they're seriously thinking about listening more to Farage, possibly even voting reform. They'd never join the party. But, you know, I get these are anecdotal, but even if I look away from the anecdotes, even if we look at the hard numbers, membership numbers rising, people are voting for them, joint first in Wales, which I'll go into that poll later. Enthusiasm's clearly there. I don't know where this idea that enthusiasm's dropping. All I can think of is that it's anecdotes from the online right, New Culture Forum, Lotus Eaters, all that sort of side of things, are effectively constantly talking to each other about how Nige isn't based enough or something like that. And so they've come to the conclusion that enthusiasm's dropping. No, I'm afraid it has to be a thing that has to be said here, and Connor, this isn't a slight on you, obviously, but the online right, we're not particularly influential. we're really not. Yeah, we get decent numbers on alternative media. Yes, Lotus East are doing quite well from what I understand. The thing is that how much of that is due to a British audience and how much is due to an American audience? Because, you know, me included in this, we're all worldwide influencers. We don't just influence Britain. I don't know exactly what Lotus East's analytics are, but I'd imagine that most of your audience is in America. Whereas I've just looked at my statistics, about 2/3 of my audience is British, which is kind of what I'd expect, because I only talk about Britain, but when it comes to Lotus Eaters, they talk an awful lot more about America, so they'll get an awful lot more Americans coming to them for their analysis and such, whereas only about 10% of my audience is American. And also, I think this Americanism has influenced the online right quite a bit as well. Yes, Nigel Farage is not as bombastic and does not exactly follow the same talking points as Trump, but why would he? He's in the UK. He is going to have to play to a UK audience, and because of the Americanization of the online right, I don't think they realise that that is actually something that makes people enthusiastic. Effectively, what we want is what Trump is doing, but being very polite about it. And that's effectively what Nigel Farage is doing. On Thursday, Farage covered a press conference to announce their 100,000th member was a former Conservative MP, Dame Andrea Jenkins, who would run as the candidate for Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. And I think it was a great appointment. Dame Andrea was candid, and in an interview with me after losing her seat about reform courting her defection for some time. Well, of course they would. They're trying to grow a coalition. This is electoral politics. They're a small party. Of course they're going to get all the help they can get. The more Tories they can get over, the more voters for Tories are likely to move over to reform. And I'm not being funny, but it's only really the online right that are in the position of saying, oh, them inviting the Tories over must mean they're wet, I don't particularly want to vote for them then. It's a very niche outlook on electoral politics, that. And again, it's not too different from what Trump did. He took over the Republican Party and converted rhinos. Hell, J.D. Vance called him a Nazi, and now he's the Vice President-elect. Why wouldn't you want ex-Tories to move over? This is basically what Nigel Farage has been doing ever since he started UKIP. He has been trying to get Tories over to his side since before we were even born, Connor. It's just good politics. Hell, the first thing he did when he created UKIP was to ask an ex-Tory, Enoch Powell, although I know he'd been kicked out of the party for years at that point, to endorse them, which he didn't actually do, probably because he just wanted to be left alone after leaving politics. But I realise I'm getting ahead of myself here. While she was a staunch Brexiteer and produced useful research on the cost of the asylum system, those fearing reform will be a refuge camp for Tory MPs might dread Farage's pronouncement that half the Conservative Party in Parliament should join reform and the other half should join the Lib Dems, that's what we've been saying for years. Given Nigel's close friendship with Priti Patel, despite her doubling down on her unapologetic importing of Boris wave, millions of third world migrants into Britain, one grows concerned as to exactly which members he has in mind for his half. Jenkins, as it happened, told the press conference that she would have loved Priti as leader. Okay, again, they're all friends. Of course they're being nice about their friends. But yeah, Priti Patel doubling down on the importing of the Boris wave, yeah, bad. I do agree. Do you know what can happen, though? They can bring her over and have a nowhere near immigration policy. You know, politics is a lot more than just immigration policy. She can be useful elsewhere. I mean, honestly, I don't think many people are going to refuse to vote for reform just because Priti Patel joins reform. They have been very consistent on their positions on immigration over the years. They have always said they want to deport criminals and illegals. They've been talking about net zero immigration for about 2 years. Obviously, one of the conditions for coming over is that you will support that policy. You know, just because Tory MPs are coming over, obviously they'll have influence on policy to some degree, but the defectors know what they're getting into with reform, especially on these policies. I think we're worried about nothing here. So on the same day they gained a high-profile candidate, Reform lost one of its most beloved spokespeople. Ben Habib announced his departure from the party following his unceremonious ousting as deputy leader in July, which... you can call it unceremonious if you want, but at the end of the day, your deputy leader obviously has to be in Parliament. That's effectively why he was ousted. He still had a position in the party, but I'm with Farage. He did seem a bit bitter about it. In an interview, Ben told me he had still never met Zia Yusuf, who was appointed chairman the same day of Ben's sacking. I mean, you can be disgruntled about that, but at the end of the day, Zia Yusuf did effectively save the Reform Party because they were in money trouble, so I'm not exactly shocked he became chairman. Alongside his concerns that the promise to democratise the party were not being kept, Ben cited his opposition to Nigel's apathy to demographic change and categorical refusal to support mass deportations as reasons for leaving. Well, personally, I don't think they're particularly worthy talking points to go on about. All going on about demographic change does is get a load of headlines in all the papers effectively calling you a racist, and you can always say, why do you care? They call everyone racist. Well, at the end of the day, why give them ammunition? And that is going to be my main thesis here. Why give them any ammunition when there's no need to? You can talk about the issues with immigration without ever talking about demographic change and sort the demographic change problem out. You don't need to talk about it openly. And in fact, I'd argue you shouldn't if all it's going to do is give you nothing but bad press. I hate this idea of there's no such thing as bad press. There is obviously such thing as bad press. Nobody watches Star Wars now apart from sycophants because of bad press. The refusal to support mass deportations, again, he said he's going to deport all illegals and criminals, or at least start the process off for deporting all of them. That's basically all mass deportation is. He doesn't need to say the words if the policy already basically aligns with it. It just comes across as not having very good political instincts, which I've said it quite openly on Twitter. I don't think Ben Habib has good political instincts. I think he's good as a spokesperson, and I do, to an extent, think it's not great for Reform to lose someone like that, but at the end of the day, he's been kicked out and they're still going up in the polls, so it's clearly not a disaster. And we get to a point where I think there is probably some fair criticism here. So James Heal of The Spectator reports that Farage, when asked about Habib's departure, sang, "The sun has got his hat on, hip 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 hooray," and later Farage told Michelle Dewberry that Ben's departure was a champagne moment and a huge relief. It appears, unlike Trump, that Farage has no mood to build coalitions with his critics. Okay, I'll get into that in a sec. Such conduct is beneath the incumbent ruler of the right and of Britain. I do agree, I don't think Farage should have been as celebratory as he was, but let's be absolutely fair here. I think he had his reasons to be a bit like this. Because on Ben's Twitter timeline, an awful lot of it is effectively him going his own way. There was the odd tweet in tacit support of Reform UK, but it was quite clear that he was moving away for some time, and that's not reason enough, obviously, for Farage to be like this, but he also went on national TV to denigrate Reform somewhat, because this was Ben Habib on his opinions on Reform UK's new document to democratise the party.
Yeah, so let me just talk about the constitution of the party, because your question to start with was, you know, are you still a member of the party? Well, technically, there's no such thing as a member of the party at the moment. You can be a subscriber to their news service, which they call membership, but it doesn't afford you a vote in any sense.
I mean, within the Constitution itself, in the party membership section 4.3, members who are in good standing, which includes basically not being in debt to the party and not being suspended, shall receive a membership number in the party's newsletter by post or electronically, which we do. The method of communication shall be at the discretion of the party. They shall be entitled to vote in such internal party elections or ballots as the board shall, in their absolute discretion, decide, and the board themselves vote in a kind of aristocratic way. Now, getting into details of the whole thing, effectively what this constitution does is keep Farage in the leadership position for at least 5 years, and I think there needs to be a supermajority of people voting him out to trigger a leadership election. But I'm not going to lie, this was a constitution that was voted on with a majority at the Reform Conference, and if we're believers in democracy, that should mean that basically you can vote on anything you want. And so the members decided, yes, we will vote on this constitution that keeps Nige as the leader for at least 5 years, because believe it or not, most people join Reform because Nige is leader. So I think trying to say that this is not a democratised constitution is a bit far-fetched. Frankly, just unneeded. It's unneeded criticism. This is the type of thing that, I'm fine with criticism, but keep the criticism off air. He could have just said, yes, I'm a member. Obviously, there's some specifics of the party that I don't particularly like, but overall, I'm happy. I am still a member, and I hope Reform do well. But no, if you take opportunity on live TV to effectively undermine the party, say effectively membership doesn't exist and that democratisation hasn't happened here, when they literally just voted on this constitution, by the way, I can understand why the top brass of Reform would not be happy with that. And that's without really knowing what's been happening behind closed doors with Reform and Ben Habib. It's hard to say, really. I mean, from what Connor Tomlinson has said, I didn't watch the 12-minute video with Ben Habib saying why he left, but if his problem is that he didn't say... But if some of his main problems were that he wasn't saying the magic words of mass deportation and wasn't going on about demographic change, again... It's too easy for Reform to point at that and say, fine, we don't want to represent that, because I'm not being funny, but as much as the online right like to go on about it, it's really not a popular position to go on about in the UK. It makes too many voters uncomfortable and is not going to make them want to vote for you. However, you can do a read between the lines type thing. Say, we are going to do the popular things of reducing immigration and deporting illegals and criminals, and then effectively the demographic problem fixes itself anyway, especially if you turn off the welfare taps, which again is another popular position. My parents were going on about how the illegal immigrants get free private healthcare and free dental checkups when we get nothing. So turning off the welfare taps, yeah, is a popular position. You can have all those policies without going on about demographic change, but if all you want to do is for them to say magic words of demographic change and mass deportation, then yeah, I'm not particularly surprised that you're going to get thrown under the bus. Politics is not a nice game. I feel like I have to remind people about that an awful lot. Effectively what it is war, and you, at the very least in public, need to have a united front. Ben Habib for some time had not been part of that united front, and if he didn't want to be part of that, that's absolutely fine, but I'm not shocked he got thrown under the bus after it. Having said that, yes, I think Farage could have been a bit less dancing on the poor man than he did. I'm fine with that criticism. That's fine to air publicly. I'm doing that. The attitude among Reform remains, as former national organiser Noel Matthews is fond of saying, that there is no alternative except them. I mean, that's just true. So they can get away with throwing some people under the bus. They have crowned themselves the heirs apparent to the hated cross-party consensus between Labour and the Conservatives. Well, they haven't crowned themselves, they just are. Every week there is a new latest poll and it always ends up looking like this or better. Look at that. 5 points behind the Tories, who are in the lead in this poll. 3 points behind Labour, who are currently, in government. We can say that they've crowned themselves as the alternative right party here, but they really don't need to crown themselves that. They just are. And as I keep saying, I always say they're joint first in Wales, but I know that they are second by an entire percentage point. But my God, that is close enough to say that there is a joint three-way first place, and Reform is one of them. I wouldn't be shocked in a few months if Reform are in the lead. Maybe neck on neck with Plaid, but Labour's only going down in Wales. So this phrasing of they've crowned themselves the heirs apparent to the hated cross-party consensus, no, they've been crowned that by the polls, by the fact they keep winning by-elections, or if not winning, coming in a close second. The Tories basically have completely screwed up again by putting Kemi Badenoch in, which I keep saying it's fine. It's fine because anytime people do remember she's leader, she is saying something nominally right-wing, and if it's not nominally right-wing, it's left-wing garbage. And when it's left-wing garbage, they don't do well in the polls. Boom, Reform are in there. Of course they're the alternative. Of course they're the heirs apparent. The Tories have shot themselves in the foot, and who's your alternative? There is no other right-wing alternative. All the other right-wing alternatives either have morons in charge or can't get anywhere. I've been told by multiple Reform officials that Nigel deserves to be PM for his tireless years of campaigning, while Farage deserves his place in the history books for his work on Brexit. I caution against complacency, buying into one's own hype. In this way was the hamartia of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. The feeling that it was her turn made it unrecoverably soul-crushing when the public chose Trump instead. They could not, in their entitlement, foresee the unpopularity of their message. Likewise, who else is there is not a winning strategy to convince voters to support your insurgent political movement. Well, yeah, but they're not getting complacent, are they? They're not here saying, oh, it's definitely Farage's turn, so we don't have to work. No, they are working tirelessly to make grassroots movements, but this is stuff that won't be on the national news because it's at the council level. It's at the Welsh constituency level. It's not at the national level. At the national level, that's all the stuff they're doing in Parliament. That's Rupert Lowe going on about foreign criminals. That's Rupert Lowe again, I suppose, going on about farmers. It's Richard Tice going on about the three lads in Manchester who are not being done by the Crown Prosecution Service. It's Nigel Farage being on national TV almost every night he can make it to talk to the nation about issues he cares about. Like, that's the stuff you're going to see nationally, but on the council level, the level that's really important, the level which is why the Greens and the Lib Dems do quite well when it comes to parliamentary elections, that's where all the work's going now, and it's not something you'll see on national news. And the only way you're going to see that is by being part of Reform and going to these membership meetings. But the thing is, I suppose the problem with the low seats is that they're not going to be willing to do that because a couple of them got kicked out of the party. Which, as I say, makes it understandable as why you would be very critical of Reform. But as I say, if you're going to be critical of them, and there's stuff to be critical about, the fact that 3 out of 5 of them voted for the assisted dying bill, that's probably the biggest example I can think of over the top of my head. If it's fair criticism, I wouldn't be having this problem, but I have a problem because I don't think this is fair criticism. I don't think it's fair to say that Reform are being complacent. They're not. They are working really hard with their, frankly, their lack of funds. They are not a rich party. They were one MP off getting decent short money. So they're going for a different route. They are really targeting things that matter to people. That's immigration, cost of living, crime. They're really focusing on those 3 main points nationally, and then looking very local when it comes to council and the Welsh elections. And guess what? It's doing really well for them. So yeah, I completely reject this criticism. Habib also expressed discontent with Reform's policy of distancing themselves from the crowds at the Unite the Kingdom rally. A straw poll of the attendees found that every one to a man voted Reform in the last election. Despite this, Richard Tice denounced them on GB News, saying we have nothing to do with Tommy Robinson or all that lot. Which is really annoying because I've been trying to look for the whole context of the clip all morning and I can't find it. People only have the bad bit, which is something else I'm going to get into with the online right, because obviously I can find that clip everywhere. Can't find the whole section where effectively he's not exactly asked it in the fairest of terms. Because my interpretation of the entire clip was, right, there's this meme of Tommy Robinson. We don't want anything to do with that stereotype. That's more what he was saying. And again, if we want to go into genuine criticism, Richard Tice isn't always the best with his words. I'm totally fine saying that. But as I say, my interpretation was he was being asked, well, all these people vote Reform. You know, there's this whole thing with Tommy Robinson. And even, to be fair here, even Connor Tomlinson says this. He says he didn't attend the marches, but is concerned about this knee-jerk need to disavow the thousands of Reform voters by guilt through association. To then say Tommy Robinson may be imprudent in his public and personal conduct, but has done less harm to the country than some of the Tory politicians. Yeah, sure. But you are admitting that, yeah, Tommy Robinson generally brings bad news. Like, again, this is a trap. What the media do a lot, even if this was on GB News, is they set traps because it makes decent Twitter content, which is all they're after. And this was a trap. Do you agree with Tommy Robinson? If you say yes, wall to wall, Tommy Robinson endorsed by Reform. And, you know, as much as we like to pretend that Tommy Robinson's a popular figure, he's not with the normie right. He's just not. And this is Reform's target, the normie right, because that is probably the largest voting bloc of the country. And unfortunately, they are posed to some degree. So of course you're going to see Reform being somewhat posed. But they're trying to win an election. They are not trying to impress the online right. Because as I keep having to unfortunately let you know, you don't represent an awful lot of people when it comes to electoral politics in Britain. To put it bluntly, you are kind of an elite class in this particular niche. But some people on the online right certainly get it. There's this whole thing going around now of basically all-rightism, where it's basically all coming down to vibes. People want to see less foreign Deliveroo drivers, for example. They want their trams and public services to not look like rubbish dumps. They want to feel like they're getting their value for money and have more disposable income, which has been dropping over the years. And again, this is all stuff that, in one form or another, Reform are getting their heads around when it comes to things that they want to talk about. As soon as they get onto Tommy Robinson, all Richard Tice was really trying to do there was shut that particular line of questioning down then and there to move on to more important topics that he actually wanted to talk about. Again, that's my interpretation. Could he have done better there? Yes, Richard Tice can always do better with the way he talks to the media. I have no problem saying that. But if I'm in these interviews as well, if I ever become a Reform candidate and I'm ever asked about Tommy Robinson, I'm sorry, I'm basically saying the same thing. I want to get off the subject. It doesn't matter. And I'm sorry that some people do get thrown under the bus, but as I keep saying, politics isn't very nice. And I'm afraid to some extent you have to understand that the interpretation here is that, yeah, you are going to be given that stereotype to some extent. We can blame that on the media. We can't blame the media for setting the stage of the play and then Reform playing their part in it to try and become popular and try and win the next election. That is their goal, bear in mind. All they really care about is electoral politics. I'm sorry, that involves throwing people under the bus. And at the very least, Connor, you can understand to some extent why he's done it. And yeah, sure, plenty of Tory politicians have done way worse things for the UK than Tommy Robinson. And are they trying to court some of them over? Yes. Will that come with conditions that they don't ruin the country if they become a Reform MP? Obviously. More importantly, though, nobody on those peaceful marches has done anything untowards to warrant such contempt. I would agree with that, but politics isn't very nice. Donald Trump does not feel the need to distance himself from even the kookiest elements of the MAGA movement when hostile press attempts to pressure him. Reform would be wise enough to do the same. Again, it's quite a different media landscape over in America. We don't play by the same rules. Our only right-wing outlet, actually, is GB News. And I'd like to remind everyone that Richard Tice was on GB News at this point and they were still laying this trap. He's kind of got no choice. If he ever says anything positive about Tommy Robinson, that's it. You've probably shot yourself in the kneecaps, I'm afraid. It's just the reality we live in. Is it fair? No, I'm not saying it's fair, but it is reality. And unfortunately, to win electoral politics, you have to deal with reality. As I'll say again and again and again, despite doing this and it being seen as a mistake by the online right, they are still going up in the polls. I hate to say it clearly wasn't a mistake, or at least a fatal mistake. Reform would also do well to remember that 4 independent Muslim MPs running exclusively on a pro-Gaza ticket were elected to Parliament. 5 of you count Jeremy Corbyn, which I don't because that's not his exclusive ticket. The prospect that Reform could win large portions of the Muslim vote without backtracking on the modus operandi of the party is a delusional proposition. Well, they didn't say that. But Farage made the exact suggestion when speaking to Winston Marshall this month. No, he didn't. If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. That is completely different. That is completely different to trying to win a large portion of the Muslim vote. Saying don't alienate Islam completely is different to wanting most of the Muslim vote. That is not what was said there, Connor. And in fact, to make it extra clear, I'm going to now show you a clip that none of the online right seem happy to share.
And Zia Yusuf, who you mentioned earlier, and there are many others, is a good example of somebody who is a Muslim by birth and by upbringing, but feels very British and is very grateful to this country for the opportunities his parents were legally given and so on to him. We have to try everything we can to bring the majority with us.
So just to make that absolutely clear to everyone, not alienating Islam effectively means handing over an olive branch to Muslims in the UK and saying, right, here's the deal, you can stay here if you become British. Now, what is his example of that? Zia Yusuf. Zia Yusuf is a perfectly fine man. Again, a man who sees himself as British, which also, from everything I've seen of him, from the fact that he's joined Reform, to specifically say, I want to be British and make Britain better. I mean, my God. Yeah, if your olive branch is to say, be more like that, this is your model immigrant, so to speak, perfect. I'm absolutely fine with that. But that's not the end of the clip, by the way.
They will have private observance. They will have slightly different ways of how they live their lives, perhaps to you and me, but they will be part of the club overall.
And that's pretty much what Britishness is. We always have had the idea of you can basically do what you want behind closed doors, to an extent, obviously. But when it comes to the public-facing part of yourself, no, you act British. You become part of the club. You are whole. This includes being civil, being friendly, following the rule of law, all that basic stuff. That is all that is being said here, which, to most people, that's all they want. The problem we have at the moment is that too many people are getting away with effectively being criminal. That is effectively the biggest issue at the moment. And what Nigel Farage has said here is effectively, in your private observance, do what you want. In public, don't commit crime and be normal. That's effectively what he said there.
Whilst, simultaneously, as all the Arab states that signed the Abraham Accords did, crack down hard on radical extremism.
Yeah, to just translate that whole thing again, it's effectively olive branch to the Muslim community, right? You can be part of the club, all right? Because it has to be said, you cannot deport all of them. It is completely impossible, and most of them probably haven't actually committed any crimes while in Britain. Those that have, though, that is what Nigel Farage means by radical Islamists, extremism. Again, he doesn't have to say it directly, but clearly the whole idea for what to do with the Muslim problem, if you want to call it that, in Britain, is that when it comes to the radicals, when it comes to the Islamists, stomp on them, get them out of here, put them in jail, whatever, deal with the issue. So those that have come over, of part of the millions that have come over, either for a better life in Britain and not entirely understanding how they do that, to join the club, or those like Zia Yusuf, obviously there's going to be no problem with them. And if there is, guess what? There will be alternative options for them. Either they will move to wherever they want to move to outside of Britain, or if they commit crimes, they will be put in jail / deported. Well, not even / even after their criminal sentence has been done, they will be deported. That is reform policy. So as far as I care, the backtracking here isn't backtracking at all. Effectively what it's saying is, right, there's a lot of Muslims here. An awful lot of them have probably never even had the opportunity to understand what it means to live in Britain. We'll give them the opportunity to do that, which as far as I care has been consistent with UKIP and reform policy. And if they don't, goodbye them. And with the extremism, we will boot that out. And if there are people who are sympathetic to that extremism, guess what? Criminal offence. So I just wanted to get that nonsense out of the way, because that is something I have seen for ages, that Nigel Farage has been backtracking and that, oh, now he's simping for Islam. And it's not true. He's effectively said to Islam, integrate or get lost, which is basically what the online right have been saying for ages. But all of a sudden Farage says it, and it's a bad thing. It's crazy. Honestly, it's crazy how this has happened. Again, I'm not personally saying Connor is unique with this perspective. It's the culmination of, frankly, the circles on Twitter and in real life he's in that have effectively made this meme of Farage of something he's not. And the point of this video is to make clear the meme you have in your head of Farage ain't the man. So Connor continues, again, if incorporating Islamic social teachings incompatible with Christianity enshrined in English unwritten constitution, monarchy and established church is Farage's vision of winning, then I cannot support reform. Well, luckily I've just shown you that that's not his vision of winning, so you can support reform. Nor is such appeasement an expedient electoral strategy. Pandering to British Muslims will only estrange the indigenous white working class voters, which reform needs to win. I don't think so. Again, actually, that Winston Marshall clip and that clip that everyone took out of context has been shared around everywhere. And they've only gone up in the poll, so I don't think that's true. As my friend Ian Hershey Ali often reminds us, Islam does not care about abstractions like religious freedom or family values, it cares only about Dawah, the clan, and the Ummah. Are you including Zia Yusuf in that? Yeah, I would agree that that is the case with political Islam, radical Islam, fundamentalist Islam, if that's what you want to call it, but a lot like Christianity, there's an awful lot of liberal ones as well. Hell, it's kind of becoming famous that over in Saudi Arabia there's a Muslim feminist movement, because obviously it's become a first world country and that just seems to be an inevitability of a first world country. Like, it's clear that even Islam is not safe from the wokery, but even then it's probably fairly reasonable feminism. And everyone constantly shows those pictures of Iran in the 70s and it was very westernized. Like, it is clearly, there is clearly a section of Muslims that are capable of being westernized. It's just, I don't want to say necessarily that the implication here is that no one who follows Islam can become westernized, but that kind of seems to be what's being implied here. Though, to be absolutely fair to Connor, I think he does clarify here that moderate-minded Muslims like Zia Yusuf or Rakib Ehsan, who, okay, No, you're not including Zia Yusuf, that's good, are a minority. Yeah, they probably are. According to the polling by the Henry Jackson Society, which Farage cited on Sky News during the election campaign, 3/4 of British Muslims believe that Hamas committed no atrocities on October 7th, and more than half view Hamas favourably. Yeah, well, we have quite a large section of white British people who think the same thing. Obviously, that's a minority, but I think it's fair to say they're westernised. 52% agree with Labour MP Tahir Ali that desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religion by drawing Muhammad should be a crime. I'm actually surprised it's that low. That means 48% don't agree with that or don't know. That 48%, it's probably fairly easy to westernise them. And Hamas committing no atrocities, as I say, there's plenty of white Brits who think that. I wouldn't necessarily... I mean, obviously Hamas are terrorists, and it should be clear that that is the case. And hell, if we're going to arrest Hamas sympathisers, hell, I'm okay with that. If that necessarily means that 3/4 of Muslims then need to be arrested for terrorist sympathy, then so be it, I guess. But clearly that does mean that there is a cohort of Muslims that if you end up alienating, yeah, you don't get their vote. Again, just to make it clear, assuming that 25% of the Muslim vote are these liberal Muslims, that's millions of votes. Quite literally millions of votes. Why would you alienate millions of votes? And as Farage says anyway, part of the point here, part of the point of their policy is to offer an olive branch to every Muslim to say, listen, are you one of the 3/4 of the British Muslims believing that Hamas committed no atrocities? Right, well, part of this olive branch is basically saying, right, look at these atrocities. Do you think this was deserved or not? And if they say yes, well, bad news for them. Like, it's nuts to me to come away from that Winston Marshall interview thinking that Farage's plan here is effectively to get Islamists on side. It's nuts to me that that is being implied here. Anyway, most alarmingly is that extremist views are concentrated in the 18 to 34 and British-born cohorts, meaning radicalisation is happening at home and only getting worse. Yeah, well, as the clip showed, Farage wants to deal with that. Both Conservative and Labour governments alike have allowed a 700-strong Muslim activist network to fester in the Home Office and produce reports which call the grooming gown scandal a grievance narrative, blah, 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 blah. The appetite to permanently expel political Islam from public life is only growing, and instead Farage is worried about alienating it. This will be a fatal mistake for reform in the country to make. Well, they're not making that mistake. Again, this isn't happening, Connor. Do you think Zia Yusuf is in favour of calling the grooming gang scandal a grievance narrative? Again, I don't know how much more clear you can make it. He has got his model British Muslim as his chairman. That was the whole point of getting him on, partly as well because of the money he gave him. And it's never been Farage's position to kick them all out. That has never been his position. No one can cite me that position of Farage. There is absolutely no citation that you can give where Farage is in favour of any of that. In fact, I can give you citations, and basically already have, where that sort of Islamist nonsense will be stomped out. I kind of can't believe you wrote this. This is definitely the worst paragraph of it all, but as I say, I can't give Connor the only blame because, as I say, a lot of his friends, a lot of his contacts, a lot of his colleagues will effectively think the same thing, and it effectively will have become a meme, despite the fact that there's no evidence backing it up. But, you know, that happens sometimes. It's happened to me. Being frank, figures in the media space and within Westminster are perturbed by Farage's reluctance to lead and his frequent backtracking on the pressing issues. Perceived backtracking. He's not backtracked on anything. As my friend Robin Ellis put it recently, to engage in British politics is to accept disappointment as a daily ritual. Well, yeah. The last thing an insurgent party needs is distant within its ranks, and the lads out on the lash vibe that Reform has, at present, just isn't good enough. So, hang on, this paragraph, I need a second to take that apart. I'm very confused. So, people are sad that Farage is apparently backtracking. Again, as I've shown, he's not. And now you're quoting Robin Ellis, whom you agree with here, that you agree that to engage in British politics is to accept disappointment. Sure. Are Reform disappointing you? Well, clearly they are. Okay. But then you say the last thing an insurgent party needs is dissident within its ranks. Right, so that's why they got rid of Ben Habib. Okay. And now, I'm not sure if you're still a Reform member or not, but you are kind of being openly dissident, and now you're accepting that the last thing an insurgent party needs, like Reform, is distant within its ranks. Like, Why would you publicly write this if you want to work with them? I want to understand this in particular, Connor. I know I'm 40 minutes in. You probably, you'll skim through this. I don't blame you if you do. You're a busy man. But I kind of want to understand why you've accepted here that the last thing an insurgent party needs is dissident. You clearly understand that, but then you say you're a critical friend of reform. I mean, I'm going to be honest. It's not exactly coming across as that at the moment. I want to make it clear. I'm not calling you a liar, but there has been misinformation in this article, just blatantly. I've gone through it. And if it's not misinformation, then I would say it's an uncharitable take that you have given to reform. You're not exactly giving them a lot of leeway here. And don't get me wrong, there have been things in this article as well that have been perfectly fair critiques, but you've dedicated 3 paragraphs here to political Islam and reform and come away with a complete wrong conclusion. That's not good enough, frankly. And I've seen your work. I know that you can do better and do better analysis. And this is what I've been worried about. And what I don't like about the online right at the moment when it comes to reform, they run around with these false memes and then come to bad conclusions like this. But then for some reason, you've now admitted that dissident probably isn't helpful. And you're openly being dissident. Are you sure your aim here is to be helpful to reform? Because you kind of just admitted that that's not your aim. But I'd be happy with any clarification you have on that, because it's perfectly reasonable that I might be misunderstanding that paragraph. So far from being the presumptive king of the British right, well, the polls are showing that anyway, Farage looks more and more like Lear, alone in the wilderness while his offspring squabble over who gets to inherit the crown. Again, I'm not going to bring up the polls again, but Farage looks very, very far from being alone in the wilderness. Hell, him going around interviewing people at the farmers' protest a couple of weeks ago, there were people there saying what you said people higher up in reform were saying, that he basically deserves to be PM. There was some young lad who said to him, "You will be Prime Minister one day." He is not alone in the wilderness. I don't know where you get that idea from. The man is joint first in Wales. How is that alone in the wilderness? He complains about woke Jaguar adverts while more pressing problems escape his attention. Connor, you are on a 5-minute segment with Julia Hartley-Brewer complaining about that very same advert. What are you talking about? Is he not allowed to spend 5 minutes of his day talking about how he doesn't like the direction Jaguar, a great British institution, is going? Are you serious? We all complain about little tidbits like this. We all complain about wokeness going too far and things that ultimately, probably don't matter. But the man likes his Jags. Of course he's going to comment on this. Let the man post his slop, my God. If he doesn't exert authority specifically on the issues his supporters look at him to address, then he will lose another 5 years to the Lib-Lab-Con consensus. Well, people do think he is an authority on immigration and things like that. You can tell because they keep going up in the polls. Reformers stand to gain from being bolder. Don't buy it. I don't buy it. Again, a lot of people seem to forget that Farage has an entire team around him. He's got Matt Goodwin on his side, a literal professor in this sort of thing, in what he needs to do. I imagine he's going along with that advice with the resources he has. And again, it's been nothing but a slow and steady uptick in the polls, in their supporters, in their members. As you said at the start, despite the fact they're doing really well, they'd be doing better if they were bolder. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. Again, I think this is the America brain thing from Trump, but you've got to bear in mind, they're a few years ahead of us. You can't be at that point yet in Britain. We're far too polite with it anyway. They should not be afraid to support policies such as mass deportation of over 1 million foreign criminals in Britain. That's in their contract, by the way, so, okay, good, they're doing that, or have that as policy. Or to oppose the long march of Islam through Britain's laws and institutions. Oh, good, they're... That's good, that's their policy too. They're going to oppose that. The BBC has called the countryside racist, so who cares if they throw the same slur at reform too? Listen, they're trying to win an election, and as much as people don't trust the mainstream media as they used to in Britain, awful lot of people still watch BBC News. Believe it or not, it does matter that they get called racist. I know a lot of online righties don't think it matters. It does. It's different over in America because there's plenty of alternative media where they can go to. But as has been said before, what is the British answer to Joe Rogan? We've got Winston Marshall. Oh, he goes on that. Oh, all of a sudden it's bad when he goes on that because he's not as bold as I'd like him to be. Yeah, that's because Winston Marshall isn't as big as the BBC, unlike Joe Rogan, who is bigger than most of the mainstream over in America. We're not in the same ecosystem. It won't work the same way. I think it will be detrimental to reform. And as I say, if your issue is they're not winning quick enough, why does that matter? We don't have elections coming up for another year. They can afford to go slow and steady and build their grassroots. That is what they are trying to do. We don't live in a system that elects presidents. It doesn't work having one big, bold guy as the leader of a political party. It doesn't work the same way. Tony Blair didn't get in just by being Tony Blair. He had John Prescott on side. He had Alistair Campbell. He had Gordon Brown. He had all these people around him who were part of his team. It wasn't just him. Same with Farage. He's got a team working on this, and it's working out really damn well. Even better, I'd argue, than Blair, because he has come from basically nothing with reform. They weren't really a party a year ago. Now they're pretty professional, to the point where even Dominic Cummings, who really does not like Nigel Farage, is effectively conceding and saying, you know what, it's actually pretty likely that he's going to destroy the Uniparty. I mean, even that alone is enough to say, how about we just support him? Yeah, he's not perfect. Why are you expecting anyone to be perfect? Come on, we live in reality. I say it as a critical friend of reform. Again, I hate to say it, Connor. This has not come across as a critical friend of reform, because quite a few things you've said are just pure disinformation. There's been fair stuff in there as well, of course. I'm not saying it's nothing but disinformation, but it certainly didn't come across as a critical friend. Please sort it out. The hour is too late for infighting and cowardice. Are you serious? This is infighting. This article is infighting. Now, again, I want to make it clear, probably the last time I'm going to say this, but Connor is the one who put his head above the parapet, so if anything in that analysis came across as either rude or unfair, I do apologise. It is also the fact that it's the whole of the online right that effectively agree with this article and is effectively the summation of why this article was written. So if I do come across as angry, bear in mind, Connor, it's not directed just at you. It's the online right in general, because I've been quite disillusioned with it quite recently, and yours just happens to be the article that I found that summarises the points quite nicely of the arguments they've been making, and as I say, I think most of them aren't great. But to finish this off, I think it's worth going through the Twitter drama that this created. I mean, I'm just going to touch on it. So, Richard Tice said, delusional garbage from Connor. This seems to miss simple facts. That the membership is now 100,000 and rising in New Year. It's likely to be bigger than the Tories. I mean, he did say that there is membership rising, but yeah, he didn't exactly make it clear that they were almost as big as the Tories, which I think is an important point. Rising polls to a record high of 22%. That is the biggest that any third party has had in Britain since post-World War II. Like, that is massive. And no one is stronger in Parliament than us in immigration and net zero. And that's also true. And as I'll say, I mean, delusional garbage, probably too strong a word. There was definitely misinformation in there, but at the same time, there were fair criticisms. But as I say, I don't think the fair criticisms make up for the disinformation and the lack of these important points that Richard Tice says here. Like, it is important to realise and accept that Reform literally are the best third party and the best force for the right that we have. And the issues we have, like, what, they're not hard enough on immigration? What, is getting rid of all criminals and illegals not good enough? You know, again, they only have 5 years if they win. You know, they've got to be realistic about what they can actually do. And quite a big thing with parliamentary democracy is that being realistic does tend to get you a few votes. Or at least if you can sell a realistic story. And there is absolutely no one in Britain that thinks it's actually reasonable to deport 10 million people in 5 years. They just don't think it can be done without sacrificing decent rule of law, which people care a little bit more about. Anyway, Connor replied to this saying, Richard, there was no need for insult. He wasn't really insulting you, he was saying your take was bad. I didn't insult you or anyone in Reform. No, but you were spreading a bit of disinformation, I will say that. To the contrary, I said it's MPs, organisers and supporters that are good people. Like I said, I'm a critical friend who voted for you, specifically in Bexley in 2021, praised Lee's defection in 23 and voted Reform in July. I spoke at a fringe event at your conference and to your MPs privately since. This is what I was talking about, the instinct to attack supporters and good faith critics. I kind of hate to say it, a lot of that article was not good faith. Not via your fault, I'm necessarily saying. You're caught up in a meme here that Reform are backstepping, that Reform support things that they frankly don't support. It's not good faith to write as fact that they are fine with Islamists in their institutions and saying that the grooming gang is just nonsense, irrelevance and things like that. It's not good faith to say that Reform don't think that's a problem, which you effectively did in your article. This isn't the way to win undecided voters nor retain core supporters. I hate to say it, it kind of is. It's working. 22%, joint first in Wales. I need the online right to have some introspection here. It's not working what you're doing. You're not selling something that generally people want. I do understand how insulting this is, but I don't mean it to be quite this insulting, but this is a bit like when Corbyn was leader of Labour, and you'd have Navarra media constantly saying, oh yeah, we have really popular policy. Loads of people want good healthcare and free internet. It's going to be great. It's how we win. And then, as it turns out, no, the way they win is by putting Starmer in. You know? You need some introspection with that, and this is a place to have introspection. Things you say the party should do, they're not doing, and they're still growing. There's a reason for that, that's all I'll say. To which Richard just replied, Connor, it's your article that's garbage, so I call it out. Look at the facts of what we are achieving. And, you know, Richard is saying it in a much more coarse way than I am, but he is effectively correct. Reform are doing really, really well, and, you know, I don't think that they have a problem with people being critical. The main issue I have with Connor's take is one, the nonsense that they imply that they don't want deportation of illegals and criminals from the UK. I don't know where that's come from. And also the weird take that they don't want to take on Islamists and get rid of political Islam. Like, what do you think the whole two-tier thing means? What do you think the main thing people can see the two-tier system as? Why do you think they're going after the Manchester airport lads? You know, they don't need to say it out loud. There's clearly no need to say that. They're doing very well because people understand what the issues are without having to directly constantly say what the issue is. You know, the British people are generally relatively intelligent and can read between the lines. You don't need to spoon-feed them this sort of thing, especially if spoon-feeding it to them is effectively just going to be non-stop headlines of attacks. As I say, why give them ammunition? They're doing very well. They keep going up in the polls. The grassroots stuff, from my experience, is going quite well. You're looking at a recipe for success here. Being bolder, I don't see how it would necessarily help. You know, what's the cost benefits of it? You put all the cost benefits together. No, I don't think it's going to help that much, if at all. I mean, hell, Reform are doing so well that there is now an open secret that Elon Musk may give Nigel Farage $100 million as an FU Starmer payment to massively help Reform, to build their grassroots organisations, to use the money to build a party that will last for a while. Clearly, the man who massively helped Donald Trump to get into the White House is happy to help Reform as well. If that is not telling you that they are doing a bang-up job for the type of people that are on our side, I don't know what else to tell you. They have been as bold as they need to be, as far as I care. I guess to conclude at this point, the online right have this really, really, really strange disdain for Farage at the moment, it seems. And it's a type of negativity that comes about from, frankly, a whole set of things that are just not true. No, they have not backtracked on immigration at all. They are still for net zero immigrants, they are still for deporting illegals, and they are still for deporting criminals. That has basically been true since the UKIP days. No, they are not backtracking by trying to get some dry Tories over. They have always been trying to make a coalition. First thing they did with UKIP was try and get Tories over. Half the MPs are ex-Tories. Lee Anderson and Richard Tice, both were ex-Tories. Hell, Ben Habib is an ex-Tory, for God's sake. He was a Tory donor and voter and activist. It's not unusual for a right-wing party to want to get people over, court people over from the right-wing party. And I know they're really left-wing, but there are righties in there. There are good right-wing people in the Tories. How do I know? I was a Tory member too. I met these people. And guess what? Loads of them said that they'd be happy to go over to Reform. I now go to Reform meetings. Wow, loads of people are ex-Tories or ex-UKIP. What a shock. He's trying to build a coalition here. I'm sorry, the online right. You're not useful for electoral politics. It's just true. It's why I'm disillusioned. We've tried to emulate what the online right did over in America. You know, they did well to push Charlie Kirk to be an anti-immigration activist. We are simply not very good at it here. because it's a different landscape here. We're not as bombastic, we don't have the same attitudes, we're much more civil and polite. And with years of trying to influence politics, we just suck at it. We're not very good. It's part of the reason I've just joined Reform and fully backed them, because they are doing way better than anything the online right has managed in a decade. Your more centre-right influencers, Winston Marshall, Chris Williamson, people like that, they are much more useful for getting on for interviews and doing things. And don't get me wrong, as I've said before, Connor Tomlinson does good work. He did a really good interview with Liz Truss. I like his work. This is just a blip on the radar, and as far as I can tell, it's because the online right, as I say, have created this whole meme about Nigel Farage as a person that he isn't. As far as I can tell, he has had the same policy positions he has basically always had, that is firmly to the right of the Tories, and he's in a position where he has to make a right-wing coalition, and I'm afraid to say that that means some of us are going to get thrown under the bus because we're useless. That's just a matter of fact. Politics, it ain't a nice game, and if you're on the firing line for the bad side of politics, well, all I can say is sorry, but it's reality. It's what happens, and they are far and away our best chance for, at the very least, going towards what I would like to see from a government. Hence, I back them. I back them completely. And this is not me saying never criticise Reform. This is not me saying always support them no matter what 100%. Because not even I do that. As I say, I had problems with their support for the assisted dying bill. But what I am saying is that if you are going to criticise them, let's at least make the criticism fair, and let's at least fully understand if what we are saying is true. Are they the type of people, is Reform the party that has backtracked on immigration? No, that's an absurd thing to say. Have they backtracked and are now open to political Islam? No, that is an absurd thing to say. Those are my main 2 points that I think you should take away from here, and if you weren't going to vote Reform because of those 2 issues, I don't know what to tell you. They're doing basically what you want them to, so why wouldn't you vote for them? Right, I think with that we've gone over for an hour, so I think that will do it for this video. Obviously, do go over to the Worcester Club, where we'll be having an antiquity stream tonight from 9 PM, carrying on with the Peloponnesian Wars from Jack. He does very good stuff. Tomorrow it will be Tosh News, where we will have a panel to go through the news of the past 2 weeks. It's usually good fun. And then on Saturday it's going to be Laughing at the Guardian with some Warman. So do come along to that too. Right, with that, please do become a subscriber, become a member, send super chats and super thanks. They will massively help the channel. Once again, Connor, if you did actually listen to this whole video, nothing personal against you. If you feel I went too harsh, it's because unfortunately you were just the target of my my anger at the online right as a whole at the moment. So don't take it personally. You do good stuff. I'll leave it there. Right, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.